Evening, everybody. Why don't you find your way to your seats, and we want to welcome those who are joining us via the internet, and we're excited to be here and to listen to one of our very own. I was thinking about Peter today and just praying for him, and I was like, you know what? Peter's a great father. He is. And it reminded me of 1 Corinthians 4:15 and 16. It says, though you have many instructors, yet you have few fathers. And the very next verse says, imitate me. And I believe Peter's a great father. He's got some good sons. Yeah. But we're not going to, although we could give a 45-minute intro tonight, we want to give Peter as much time as possible. But there's one other thing that I believe is very, very significant about tonight. As I was in college, I had a professor. He gave me a saying, and it kind of just stuck in my heart. It says, what I say is carved in vapor, and what I write is carved in stone. What I say is like a vapor, but what I write lives on and on. And Peter has written a book that will outlive him. And it's a beautiful thing because when we put our hand and our pen to the paper, you know, the psalmist said, my tongue is a ready writer. And Peter has written a beautiful book, and I'm excited to get the inside scoop on it tonight. So why don't we just stand and pray, and then we're going to turn this over to Peter tonight. Father, we love you so much, and it's always a privilege to come together with people of like precious faith. And I ask that tonight, as we sit and as we listen, that our ears would be open and our hearts would be open to receive what you're doing and what you've done in Peter and his life. And I ask that you would bless him and give him the words to say. And I ask, Father, tonight that as the word goes forth, I thank you that it will not return void, but it will accomplish what it set out to do. And we give you this time, and we bless you in Yeshua's name. Amen. Come on, Peter. Give Peter a big hand tonight.
Hey, thank you, everybody, for being here tonight. This is really encouraging. And so you get the inside scoop for how this book was written. So first, I'd like to say thank you for coming. And then also, I want you to know who's some of the people that have been involved in writing this book. And so it started with a Jewish roommate in college who got me thinking about how Jews are involved in the Bible, because I didn't know until I was raised Catholic. And then my family, my wife is here tonight, and Susan, and she had a big part in this book. My daughter, Hosanna, has been coming here to El Shaddai with us now since we started in 2008. And my son, Kellen, is a big encouragement learning Hebrew with me. So there was the Assembly of God pastor on Vashon Island who told me things about the gospel that I'd never heard anywhere before. These people are all also mentioned by name in the book. Lutheran pastor on the island, and I said, and he's also a doctor, and he was a big help in writing the book. And when I asked him if he wanted to be acknowledged, he said, sure. Actually, he made some real critical suggestions and changes to the book. And I said, but I'm not sure you want to have your name associated with this book since you're in the Lutheran church. And he goes, I don't care about that. He goes, this is true. People need to hear it. I'm all for it. So I was impressed. I have a Catholic coworker who reviewed the book for me. Actually, he's a lot of the reason why I wrote the book, because he tried for about 6 months to convert me. And so we had a lot of interesting conversations. And he says that after he got listed in the acknowledgments, he had to go to confession. So there's several people here from El Shaddai Ministries. That would include Scott Dakers and the Hebrew class. I see some Hebrew class people here tonight, Ann and Verna and Vani and Lee from way back, and Pamela. And I have to say this, of course, this book never would have happened if it weren't for Pastor Mark, right? And we came here in '08, walked in, Donna handed us 8 pages of notes. I freaked out, and it was the best sermon, and so we've been coming ever since. Then there's I like to call him a secular strategist. I think he might be an atheist, but he's a retired medic. He's retired Navy, and he also helped me with very practical things with the book, and was the first person to get a book. And Danny Ben-Gigi is my publisher, and he was a big encouragement. He also helped shape how it would be written. And I want to mention last, and most of all, my Catholic mom and dad. So ever since I was a little kid, my dad would let me do what I thought was important, even if it was embarrassing to the family. And I'm still kind of amazed that he did that. I mean, there weren't bad things, but there are things that normally a parent wouldn't let their kid do, like mimic the entire Mass, whatever the priest is doing. I would be standing up there doing it, and my dad is like, whatever. And so he always just let me do that. And then my mom, she's no longer alive, but as I was leaving the Catholic Church and I got into a bad situation, and I ended up moving from Philadelphia to Santa Fe, and they brought me up they kind of knew what was going on with this bad situation, and they brought me up to Seattle for a 1-week visit. This was back in '81, and I've been here ever since. But they, because of the situation, she'd begun something called a novena. It's something like 46 or 56 days of prayer, something like 28 days in petition and 28 days in thanksgiving. And so she started that like almost 2 months earlier. And the day that my problem was solved fell on a month earlier she started. And the day that I got through that trauma was her first scheduled day of Thanksgiving. And so even though this book is critical, it's a tough read, I don't want to confuse that with mocking. I know that God is answering prayers for a lot of Christians. A lot of people are seeking God. And 30 years ago, I heard about Hebrew roots, Messianic Judaism. I thought it was insane. And so, we're all trying to figure this out. And I thank all these people who've helped me with the book. So, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. And the Word is now to be written in our heart. The written Word and the living Word is to be in our heart. Torah, Torah, Torah. Now we know this is a bad guy, right? This is from the movie The Passion. And he's someone who maybe wanted people to focus on their traditions instead of Torah. And this also is a guy who wants people to focus on traditions rather than Torah. So this is some of the things that that you will hear when you're in the regular Christian church. Torah has passed away. Jews thought they were saved by keeping Torah. So this is something I always heard as a Christian, the first 50 years of my life was that, oh my gosh, Jews thought that they were saved by keeping Torah. And there's an article in the International Standard Bible Encyclopedia that says that that's a misnomer. They thought that they were in covenant with God, and they followed Torah in order to keep the blessing. So they're not thinking that they get saved by Torah. in a sense, they get saved by a promise just like we believe. He calls God's appointed times the feasts of the Jews. Remember that? It was always Passover and unleavened bread, trumpets. Those are all the feasts of the Jews. Thinks the Sabbath is Sunday. I remember arguing, remember Romans 14, right? Any day is good. As long as you take a day, any day, one man holds one day above another sees every day alike. And that's not what Romans 14 is saying. And that's covered in chapter 3, traditional objections to Torah. He doesn't know that Luther authorized the Holocaust. This is something that probably most of us only found out through Pastor Mark. I ended up reading Luther's book twice. The first time it shocked me. I waited about a year, I read it again, and I was in a depression for several months after reading it the second time. And for the first time, I realized what it must feel like for a Jew to live in a Gentile society with that kind of diatribe hanging over civilization's head, because it's completely shocking what Luther said. And he really did authorize everything Hitler did. In fact, I don't know why it took 400 years for Germany to produce a Hitler after Luther said that. And he doesn't know the definition of the new covenant. Now, if you're in a new covenant church and you believe the Bible, then you should know the biblical definition of the new covenant. And I didn't for 50 years. I was an elder at our congregation. I would preach, and I didn't know the biblical definition. I found that out through coming into Hebrew roots. And we'll see that later, what that is. But, you can't know what the biblical definition of the new covenant is as a Christian. You just can't know it. Because, in essence, it says that one of the things it says is that the Torah will be written in the heart. And so you can't know that because it's just contrary to everything else that you know, that Torah has been done away with. I've had a fair, a Torah fair booth at a fair on our island for like 5 years. And I've asked many people. Now, usually I don't put them on the spot because I know they're not going to know and I don't want to embarrass them. But I have put about 100 people on the spot for various reasons. And one story in particular kind of gives you an idea what birthed this book. So this is a guy I've known for 19 years. I respect him. He's the president of a Bible college. He's been a pastor for like 30 years. He's now retired. And he came up to my booth one time and he's like, "So, what's this all about? What's this all about?" So I told him, well, it's, Torah in the heart. And he's like, "You shouldn't be talking to the church about that. You shouldn't be talking to Christians. You should only talk to Jews." And I'm thinking, well, Jews know that, And so I said, well, what is the biblical definition of the new covenant? And we'll see that, like I said, in a little bit. And he gives the typical answer, which is Jesus died for our sin and instituted the new covenant on Passover. And that's, that's true. I mean, I believe that. But it's not the biblical definition. It's actually defined in both the Old Testament and the New Testament quotes. It's a copy, and it's defined. And so I showed him that. And so then the conversation went on, and I asked him again, and he gave his traditional answer again, and I showed him again, and this was a long conversation. And it happened a third time, and he was getting pretty agitated, and finally he said, you know what you are? You're a Pharisee. And I've talked to a lot of people, I kind of saw it coming. And so I said, that's really interesting, because the biggest problem Jesus had with the Pharisees was when they would put their tradition over Torah. 3 times I've shown you the biblical definition of the new covenant, and 3 times you've answered with tradition. So technically, and you could see his eyes get big, Anyway, I still like him. I don't think he likes me so much anymore. I learned that kind of social interaction from the old Jeff Morton, not the new Jeff Morton. The new Jeff Morton is kinder and gentler. So who is this? Who is this that is doing this? There's a particular name attached to this picture right here. And I'll show you. That's me. All right? That's me. And who else believes all those things? And it's you, right? Because we all believed all that stuff until we found out about Hebrew roots. So now, if I told you that the Earth was the center of the universe, or the solar system at least, and the sun went around it, what would you think about me? Huh? He doesn't even want to repeat what he would think about me. All right, so, and yet this was the obvious, the truth for thousands of years, for for all of human history until about 200 years ago. This was just a no-brainer. And that the Earth was the center of the solar system, right? And if you anyone who doubted it, you could just get up in the morning, there comes the sun up in the east, sets in the west, same thing happens the next day. Every year the stars go around the Earth. It's obvious, right? We don't really need to be debating this. And then about 1517, this guy comes along, Copernicus, and he goes, I think the Earth goes around the sun. Well, there wasn't really anybody that I know of that didn't think he was insane. And so, and what's interesting about it is that 100 years after Copernicus, Galileo, who was saying the same thing, was forced to recant. And I've read his confession, and he's like, I have said horrible things, and I won't speak such heresies anymore. And if I know anybody that says these heresies, I will turn them in. And it's like this big long thing. And it was 100 years, almost 200 after that, before people understood that the Earth goes around the sun and not the other way around. So it took about 200 years. So this is an illustration from Copernicus and the Jews, one of the books that the bookstore sells. And the reason it's useful is because we've all known for most of our lives, because most of us were in some other church before we got involved in Hebrew roots. So we've all known for our whole lives that Torah has been done away with, okay? The Jews thought that they could get saved by keeping Torah. They kind of missed the boat, and Torah's been done away with. And now we find out, oh my gosh, that was wrong. And it's hard for us to learn that. And many of us, our friends and family, haven't figured it out yet, and they think we're insane. So I wonder how long it's going to take for the church. And my thought is that I read, when I was in shop class, they talked about how wood factories have sawdust that builds up in the air, and they have to be super careful not to get just one spark, because if they do, the whole place can go up like a bomb. And that's kind of what happened with the Protestant Reformation, with something called indulgences. How many here know what the indulgences are? Okay. How many here know what the 95 Theses are? The 95 Theses are basically why we're not all Catholic. And 1517, Martin Luther. So before I wrote this book about 4 years ago, I was writing these things called single shots, and I would post them every day on Facebook. And after a while, I realized, these are kind of like the 95 Theses, and that's when I first got the idea to kind of put them together in a book. And so what the 95 Theses were is they were a reaction to the selling of indulgences. So this is from the movie Luther, and this is Tetzel, Father Tetzel, who was selling indulgences in order to finance the building of St. Peter's Basilica in Rome. And he was an amazing salesman and very effective. And people thought that by buying an indulgence for a dead loved one specifically, they could get that person out of purgatory. And so he actually, there's a couplet attributed to him that says, as soon as the gold in the casket rings, the rescued soul to heaven springs. And he had a real traveling sales show that was very effective. It got close to Luther's town one time, and Luther went through the roof, and he wrote 95 theses, basically jabs at the whole idea that you could buy your way out of purgatory. The Pope wanted to kill him, and it started the Protestant Reformation. So what that was there was this sawdust building up in the factory, and finally that was the right spark, and it was like an explosion. I think it's kind of like that now. We have different call-in Christian radio shows. They're getting asked about Sabbath and Passover, and they say, oh, it's crazy, that's insane, that's, those people are backward, and it's just happening more and more, and it's building up. At some point, there's going to be a spark, I hope, where people catch, and it changes, and I'm actually hoping that my book will be that spark. But if it isn't, it could be another spark. All right, so when I try to explain to people where we are, people don't understand us, right? Have you had that? Are you Jewish now? What, what's don't you know that's all been done away with? You're going to lose your salvation, right? So what I like to do, explain this to people, is I draw this circle, and so these are Jews, and Jews are all about Torah and not so much Jesus, right? And Christians are all about Jesus and not so much Torah. And see where the circles intersect? That's where we are, right? And we're these little, we're like blue circles on the outside, but we're yellow on the inside, So when Christians look at us, they go, he's Jewish. And when Jews look at us, they go, that's a Christian. And so it just confuses everybody. On the trip, because I wear this kippah, it makes it even worse. And on this trip, I had two different Jewish guys come up to me as we were about ready to go on our tour, and they're like, what's going on here? And so, all right, so now I'll talk a little about the book. This is how, the first chapter is Torah's 95 Theses. And I was going to call the book that, but then I found out very few people know what the 95 Theses were, so it kind of would have been lost. So my wife came up with Torah, Torah, Torah. Thank you, honey. And so this is now by the Lord's Prayer, right? So if you look from top left across and then bottom left across, it's Our Father in heaven, hallowed be your name, your kingdom come. And then bottom left, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us today our daily bread, and forgive us our debts as we have forgiven our debtors, and lead us not into a temptation, but deliver us from the evil one. So that's how the book is. The first chapter is what it is my wife and I, we taught a parenting class for it's an 18-week class. We led this class, and we loved this class, so we did it 13 times. And I found that a lot of men show up and they're like, just give me the bottom line. Just give me the bottom line. And so this is a way of kind of summing up the bottom line. So I think some men are going to read this book from the bottom up, the bottom of the page up. But anyway, so this is what happened, right? When we found out about Hebrew roots, you take your whole world and kind of, spin it around. And so here it is. This is the biblical definition of the new covenant, okay? Now you can't really read it, but that's okay because you can buy the book. So, now on the left is a quote from Jeremiah 31. It's easy to remember because it's Jeremiah 31:31. And on the right is a quote from Hebrews 8:8. So this is thesis 2 and thesis 3 in the book, chapter 1. And you see at the bottom of each is the icon for the word, right? Your will be done on earth. So here it is. This is the biblical definition of the new covenant. And it says basically three things. I mean, this is the way I break it up. And it says it in both Jeremiah and Hebrews, because Hebrews is quoting the entire passage. And so it says the new covenant is with Israel. The new covenant is Torah, written on the heart. And the new covenant is the forgiveness of sin. Pretty much the only one you'll hear in the Christian church is forgiveness of sin. And what we're learning in Hebrew roots is that it's with Israel and it's Torah written in the heart. But this is the biblical definition right here, quoted in Hebrews. Another example of a thesis is thesis number 74. And the interesting thing about this is it kind of connects with two other theses. There's a quote on this page. This is from Matthew 7, the Sermon on the Mount. Many will say to me in that day, Lord, Lord, right? And then he'll say, I never knew you. Well, in Hosea, there's a verse where God is saying, Israel shall cry unto me, my God. And in both cases, it's too late. They're calling out, but they never really meant it while they were alive, and now it's too late. In the Hosea example, judgment is coming, and it can't be stopped. And in the New Testament, Yeshua, Sermon on the Mount, it's at the last judgment when the Son of Man is sitting on his throne. Then there's another link, and that's, again, thesis 74, where it says, depart from me, ye that work iniquity. Now, the interesting thing about this is something that's kind of key to understand. The word for iniquity is anomia. And in Greek, you put an A in front of a word to make the opposite. So like a theist is someone who believes in God, and an atheist is someone who doesn't believe in God. Okay, so nomos, or nomia, is law. Anomia is against the law. So the word translated iniquity in the Greek is anomia, against the law. That's what Yeshua is talking about. You, depart from me, you workers of iniquity, ye that work iniquity. Well, what law do you think Yeshua was talking about? Was he talking about Roman law? You think he was talking about civil law? Maybe contract law? You know, he's talking about Torah. And this is a frightening, sobering verse. And it's mirrored, I suppose, in thesis 91, and it's Paul writing in 2 Thessalonians, then shall that wicked be revealed. And the wicked is the word anamos, the one who is against the law, the wicked one, that man of sin. He's the one who's against the law. And so that's why it's so important that we understand the centrality of Torah, and not that it hasn't passed away like we were long led to believe. Chapter 2 is Torah's calendar, appointed times, and menu. So how Yeshua fulfilled the appointed times. Now, most of you already know this, but in case there's someone who just popped in here tonight, or someone on the internet who just happened to find us, there's 7 feasts in the biblical year. Yeshua already fulfilled the first 4. And we believe when he's coming back, he'll fulfill the next 3. Now, he did the first 4, not only in order, but to the day, and in some cases to the hour. Like Passover. He was the Passover lamb. Unleavened bread. They got to get the leavening out of the home, right? This is the way I look at his fulfillment of that. He took on sin while on the cross, and at that point became leavened bread. He's the bread of life, right? But he took sin and became leavened. So we got to get him down and get him away, but it's almost Sabbath. And sunset was the point when they had to have the leavened bread away for the Feast of Unleavened Bread. And so they wrap him in white linen and put him in a tomb. Then the third feast is first fruits, and that's the day he rose, sent the Holy Spirit on Shavuot. Now there's been this big break in time. The next feast is trumpets. And that rings a bell, if you've been reading the New Testament. The trump shall sound at the last trump, the dead will rise. So that's probably the next feast to get fulfilled. Then Yom Kippur, judgment, and tabernacles, living with God. So Yeshua either already fulfilled them or will fulfill these feasts. So it's important to know them, like Pastor Mark says, to be on the calendar. Otherwise, you have no clue when these are coming up. Chapter 3 talks about objections. And, right, we all used to believe that Acts chapter 10, Peter's on the roof, and he gets that vision of the unclean animals coming down, the command to kill Peter and eat, right? We all thought that meant that the Leviticus 11 unclean food laws were done away with, right? Is there anybody here who didn't think that at some point? I mean, maybe there is. But anyway, I imagine most of you thought that. And I did too, right? For 50 years, I thought, this vision undoes Leviticus 11. Well, there's two big problems with thinking that. The first big problem is that Peter didn't think that, right? In Acts chapter 10, he interprets his dream. He says, God has shown me, brothers, not to call any man unclean. In Acts 11, they say to him, you went into the home of a Gentile, why'd you do that? And he says, God has shown me not to call any man unclean. And they all go, he tells them the dream, and they go, wow, God's allowing Gentiles into the kingdom. So there's no evidence that Peter ever thought it was really about food. There's a couple other times when there's food in dreams, and it doesn't mean food. Joseph dreamed about sheaves bowing down to him, and that was his brothers, and the sun and the moon and stars. And also Gideon, when he went down into the camp before attacking, and there were two men, and he says, I just had a dream about a loaf of barley rolling in and smashing the tents. And the other guy goes, this is nothing but the sword of Gideon, right? So a loaf of bread is a sword. So even though it really seems like Leviticus 11 is being undone here, Peter didn't take it that way. The other big problem is different commentators say this happened 6 to 10 years after Yeshua ascended. And what does Peter say? Right? 3 times God's telling him to eat this way. And 3 times he says, never, Lord. I have never eaten anything unclean or common. So Peter never got the memo, right? He wasn't there that day that Jesus said everything is clean. Because there's another passage also in chapter 3 where people think Jesus declared all foods clean. But Peter right? He never ate unclean for 6-10 years after this. And there's no evidence he ever did after anyway. So that's a hard one. When you first hear that, you're like, oh, come on. That means that you can eat anything now. But when you look at it, if the Bible interprets itself, don't make up a different interpretation. That chapter ends with an encouragement on living a life of faith and trusting the instruments. And I want to especially thank my Catholic friend, Scott Dakers from here, my wife, and Pastor Mark for that. Chapter 4 is about when you run into hazards. You know how you get started, you think, oh, wow, this is so cool, Hebrew roots and Torahs for today, and then somebody says, you idiot, don't you know you're being brainwashed? And has that happened to anybody? And so what to do when you run into hazards like that? And this encouragement. So this is another passage that's repeated. Both Isaiah and Micah say this. And I like to read this because this is talking about us, I think. And many nations, and the word there is goyim. You ever hear the word goy? You know, there's Jews and there's goys. And goy is a Gentile, right? And so the word there is actually goyim, meaning nations, that's non-Jews. And many nations shall come and say, come and let us go up to the mountain of the Lord and to the house of the God of Jacob. And he will teach us of his ways, and we will walk in his paths. For the law, and that's in the Hebrew, that's Torah, shall go forth of Zion, and the word of the Lord from Jerusalem. So we're actually the ones that are supposed to be encouraging Jews to go up to Jerusalem. And if you heard David Rubin talk, he said it here. He said it on the trip to Israel when we heard him talk. Notzrim, meaning those of the Nazarene, is a kind of a slur for Christians in Judaism. Like if in Hebrew, you talk about the Notzrim, the ones who follow the Nazarene, the Notzrim. And David Rubin is Jewish, and he likes to point out when people say that. Jeremiah 31, it's either verse 5 or verse 6, it says the watchman will say, go up to Zion. And the word for watchman there is Notzrim. And he'll show that to them like, oh. Because this is like a bad word, but now it's a good word. So that's us. That's our job. One of our jobs. All right. All right. This is my Facebook page. That means I need you to like it. All right? And if you click on the About tab, it'll take you to my website, and that's TorahInMyHeart.com. And there's a thing there on treasures. And that's basically pastors' 52 or whatever Torah portions put into words from paying attention for the last 7 years. And so there's a lot of people on the internet that like to watch those. And if you're on the internet, you want to watch those or read about them, it kind of sums up the Torah portion, some of pastors' insights. And then there's a way, if you want to learn to read the Bible in Hebrew, there's a way to do that. And you will tear out your hair learning how to read the Bible in Hebrew. So it's happened to me. All right. So just for an example of how it doesn't make sense that Torah has been done away with, did God rescue Israel from Egypt and take them into a promised land, and on the way into the promised land, put them back in slavery again to Torah? Was that his idea? So Torah has never been meant to be enslaving. It's life, it's liberty. And we've had a completely different idea from being raised Orthodox Christians. But that's not what it's for. Now, I've got a treat for you. So, we're closing. So, on the back table, of course, is the book, and you can buy 10 each. If each of you can buy 10. No, you can buy more than that. You can buy them in groups of 10. Okay? And we also have this T-shirt. Now, this T-shirt, it's $25. And I know that's kind of expensive, but this is the world premiere of this T-shirt, okay? It's never been offered anywhere else for sale except tonight. And we might sell out. Now, it's digitally printed, and there wasn't a cheap way to do it. That's why the shirt is so expensive. But at Custom Ink, they were trying to figure out how to do it so that you could still read the Hebrew, and it had to be digitally printed. This has been a fun shirt. I've had people down the street go, like your shirt. And when I was up at the Ironman in Canada, a woman said to me, she goes, hey, wait a minute. And she starts reading my shirt, right? And then she goes, but I could say whatever I want because you don't even read Hebrew, right? I go, no, I read Hebrew. She goes, oh, I better be careful. So then, and then I'll tell you why this is a fun serendipity story for this shirt. So, Yeshua said, if you believed in Moses, you would have believed in me. Well, the Masoretic scribes say that this darosh and this darash, it's a repeated word. Hebrew does that, like it'll repeat the word instead of saying very or really, it'll repeat the word. So they say that this darosh is, if you count all the words in Torah, This Dorosh is in the first half of Torah, and this Dorash is in the second half of Torah. And so this is the actual very middle of the Torah. It's Leviticus chapter 10, verse 16. And what's happening is Moses is diligently seeking the goat of the sin offering, and it's already been burned up. This was the first tabernacle, the first fire from heaven, the first sacrifice of sin offering for the people, and it wasn't completed. And Yeshua says, Moses wrote of me, and this is the very middle. And Hebrews says that Yeshua carried his blood into the most holy place in heaven. So it's like Yeshua completed what never happened when it should have, that first sin offering. So Vicky Biltz took the picture. This is from the El Shaddai Torah scroll. This is a picture of that. And she took the picture, and my wife came up with the title, and so I entered it in this. There's this online competition called 99 Designs. My son told me about it. He had something designed by a guy in Eastern Europe that he loves. Well, I got some Hispanic guy ended up winning the contest and designing the book cover. And so after it was done, I wrote him and I said, would you like a copy? He goes, yeah, send me a copy. And he gives me his address and everything. And his name is Jesus Cordero. I'm like, I wonder what that means. So, Google Translate, I type in Jesus Cordero. Anyone know what that means? Jesus, the Lamb. That's the guy who designed my shirt and my book. That was fun. So I'm going to close with this story, and thank you all for coming. And what we'll do is we'll also close with the Lord's Prayer. Try to say it in Hebrew if we can, okay? It's up there. Can you read that? The English? Okay, so we'll try to do that in Hebrew, reading the transliteration. But first, here's a story. We built our house on Vashon Island, and I'd never built a house before. And actually, I had it built, but I did a lot of the work beforehand. And I realized after that experience, and I'd like to see if some of you who build would agree with me, when the foundation is done, it's all you've got is the foundation, right? The house is almost finished. Does that make sense to anyone? Okay. The reason for, before that, if I looked at a foundation, I thought, wow, they've got a lot of work to do. But once you've put a foundation in, the work is almost done because you've selected where to live. You've bought land. You've gone over house plans. You've arranged financing. You've found a contractor. You've had guys come out and scrape and measure, and you've gotten permits. And if you live around here, the permits is a big thing. And when that foundation is in, it's like it's almost done. It's like, we're almost done. Well, God spent a long time building a foundation. And Torah comes from the word yara, which one of the meanings is foundation. And Torah is the foundation. And it's kind of like God built this foundation. Imagine if I had built this foundation and then I said, I like that other side of the property better. And so I built my house over there with no foundation and just ignored this one. And that's kind of what the church has done by saying Torah doesn't count anymore. Torah is the foundation that God built. And it doesn't make sense for us to try to build a foundation in Rome or England or America, but to go with the foundation that God built over thousands of years. So let's close with this prayer. This is go ahead and stand. All right, so I don't have a laser pointer, but if we all go together, I think we'll be okay. So for example, the first word is Avinu. So you want to read from right to left, starting on the right side. And that Avinu means our Father. So basically what you're going to be doing is you're going to be reading the Lord's Prayer and probably pretty close to the way that Yeshua told his disciples to pray. All right? And this is in the book, by the way. All right. Avinu sheba shamayim yitkabel Yikadesh Shimcha Ve'yitbarech Malchucha Retzoncha Yihye Asui Bashamayim Uva'aretz Ve'titen Lachmenu Temidit Umechol. We're on the second page now, top right. Umechol lanu chatutenu kaasher anachnu mochalim lachotim lanu ve'al tevi'enu lidei nisayon ve'shamreinu mikol ra. Amen. Thank you very much. And any questions? Oh, someone wants to see the back of the shirt. Yeah. Any questions before you go? Yes.
How was your book being received?
Go ahead. If you want to leave, you can. If you want to make a beeline for the shirts, you can. So Jeff asks, how is the book being received? Every review so far has been positive. Now, I love that, and I've put some of the reviews on my website. You're actually the only slightly negative review I've had, which is it's harsh, and it is. It's a harsh book. I don't waste a lot of time getting into the issue. Basically, the first page of the introduction gets into the issue. But if you read the book and you like it, and you're an Amazon member, please make a positive review on Amazon, because at some point the haters are going to get a hold of my book, and I need to get some positive reviews in before that happens. It's all been positive now and very encouraging for those of you who read it. Thank you very much. Yes. Yeah, go ahead. Thanks. Yeah. Yes. No, I stopped eating pork about when we came here. No, maybe a little before that, because I was involved in another Messianic synagogue before coming here. And it wasn't hard for me to quit pork. When people have trouble quitting pork, one option is like turkey bacon. It's made from turkey, but it tastes, from what I understand, it tastes just like bacon. I don't have any desire to eat pork, but those people that have to go through withdrawal, they might like turkey bacon. Yes, because of Leviticus 11, and I don't think Acts 10 undid it, or Mark 7 or Matthew 15. And that's in chapter 3. Yeah, and then shellfish, all that, yeah. It's not hard. And by the way, 7 years ago, I made my, it was 11 years ago, I went to Israel for the first time, and it changed my life. And I also stopped mixing meat and dairy like they do in Israel. And I know that it's really hard to make a biblical case for that. Traditional Judaism makes a biblical case for not eating meat and dairy together. I would have trouble making a biblical case for that. But I separate them just because that trip changed my life. And so basically, I eat like a vegetarian because I love milk. So anyway, was that all? Or do you have another question? So they don't, she wonders why don't they eat milk and meat together? And that's based on the verse that says not to eat a kid boiled in its mother's milk. And yet, okay, like Danny Ben-Gigi, the publisher, he's Jewish, Israeli, and he said, remember when it says Abraham kept my Torah, right? That's in Galatians. Abraham kept the Torah. Oh, no, Genesis, and then Paul talks about how Abraham had the gospel. But did you know that? Did you know Abraham had the gospel? Yes. 2,000 years before Yeshua? Yeah, Paul says that. So remember when Abraham had Torah, right? Abraham hosts the Lord and the two angels, right? And he serves them milk and meat. And like Danny Bengigi says, he didn't serve the milk and then like they all sat there like under the tree for 4 hours, until they had the meat. So, yeah, but I just do it because I love Israel. Any other questions? All right, thank you very much for coming, everybody. Appreciate it. Thank you.